All right, so this is something that I've been wondering about for a while. Probably can get a lot of other Star Wars fans angry, like I did with my last video about Star Wars, but who cares? One thing though, like I'm a s just step above a casual fan. Like I've seen all the movies multiple times, but I haven't like read all the books or anything. So if you find like a factual error, I really don't care. So the question of this video is: were the Sith actually the good guys in Star Wars? Um, it's something I've been wondering for a while, and I'm going to kind of make the case for it. So first of all, the important thing to remember about Star Wars is it's told from a Jedi perspective, right? And so you have to take that with a grain of salt, like all the facts, right? If we're trying to like examine it objectively, we have to realize that these are the facts told to us by people who are sympathetic to the Jedi. It's kind of like, a friend telling you about a fight that they had with a coworker, right? And have you ever had that where like a friend is like talking about a fight they had with a coworker or their boyfriend or their girlfriend or whatever, and you just kind of think to yourself midway through, you're like, I don't know, I think that you were the bad guy in this situation. That's kind of how I am experiencing Star Wars nowadays. So to start off with, one important thing to remember about Star Wars is that it was about Vietnam. George Lucas has made this like incredibly clear. He's talked about it multiple times, and so within the Star Wars universe, Luke Skywalker, I think this guy's name is Luke Don. Um, this like Vietnamese commander. Yoda is basically Ho Chi Minh. Palpatine is a mix between Lyndon B. Johnson. You can see the kind of similarities in their faces, and Richard Nixon. That was like the whole like taking power. And then Darth Vader is like General Westmoreland, right? And just to start off with, like, I know it's like kind of trendy to like shit on America, but yeah, even if you like are even if you like think that the Vietnam War was a bad thing, which I do too. It's kind of hard to like look at Ho Chi Minh and like read about like the atrocities that he did and the terrible things that he did and think that like, oh yeah, these guys were the good guys, right? But yeah, so just to start off with, like, what was the Republic? I keep having to move this, right? So the Republic, in Star Wars Episode 1, and 2 and 3, was basically like this like really loosely knit, it was more of a confederacy of different planets, and they had this galactic senate, but it was like really like underlying the fact that the galactic senate and the central galactic power didn't actually have that much power to adjudicate over the rest of the empire. And one of the big results of that was that there was kind of constant war going on. And, just to kind of draw some similarities, like, it was pretty similar to, like, pre-Julius Caesar Roman Republic. It was pretty similar to, like, the United States during the Gilded Age, where basically you had, like, cities and counties all run by, like, political bosses and political machines. And, you can kind of say that that was, like, democratic, but, like, there was no democracy in New York City, right? Like, Boss Tweed controlled everything, and even though it was democratic and decentralized, it wasn't actually like that, right? So you had kind of this false view, this kind of like false democracy, right? And then you also have like another example is like Italy in like from like the 1200s to like the 1800s, where like they had these like bunch of different city states that were like alternatively warring with each other and alliances and all of these different things, but all controlled by political families in these states. And the result of that, as I kind of alluded to, was that you had constant warfare, right? And in the Star Wars series, they say that the warfare was caused by the Sith. It was like all this like master plot by Darth Sidious to destabilize the Empire. But again, like, I think that in that type of situation, you have to like, remember, like, this is your friend talking about a fight that they had with their coworker where your friend might be in the wrong. Like, was it actually, Darth Sidious who was behind all of these fights and all of these things, or maybe he just took advantage of it and was egging people on? But the fact of the matter is that, like, during the Star Wars Republic, you had constant war between planets. You had the Trade Federation having embargoes. You had all this internal strife, and then on top of that, if you look at other situations where you had a similar type of structure, in those situations you also had constant war and constant fighting, right? Again, Italy is a great example. Rome was a great example. Again, like people have this like idealized version of pre-Julius Caesar Rome, where it was like this beautiful republic, the same way that we view the Republic in Star Wars. The actual truth, when you read the histories, that was an incredibly politically unstable situation where every 5-10 years there was a different coup, a different group of people fighting over control with each other. You had Sulla, you had Marius, you had the triumvirates. Not the triumvirates, the tribunes. I think it was like 50, 60 years before Julius Caesar. I mean, I don't want to get to the nitty gritty of pre-Julius Caesar Rome, but there was a lot of civil war and there was a lot of fighting going on, right? But then also the Jedi Council. The Jedi Council are kind of presented to us as these wise leaders who understand the Force and are all knowing, led by Yoda. But if you think about what the Jedi Council is in modern terms, right? They are a religious cult, right? Where the Force is their god. And so you have this situation where you have this incredibly destabilized republic, where you have constant warfare that's being led partially by a very weak leader and a religious cult that has no accountability to anybody, that decides everything by themselves. Again, the Republic has no check on the Jedi Council, and it's kind of very similar in terms of governance structure to the way that Iran is structured right now, where you have the mullahs and the ayatollah who run Iran. You have a similar thing in the Jedi Council, and you kind of think okay, but imagine you're an actual citizen of these areas, right? It's okay, well, we have an unelected Jedi Council ruling the world, and this guy Yoda, and he just decides things. That doesn't sound very good, right? But then you look at the actual effects of these local governance. So Naboo, we can look at planets like Tatooine or whatever, but those are viewed as outliers, right? But Naboo is kind of viewed as this is the best of the Empire, right? This is kind of the thing that we want to preserve, right? But even look at Naboo, right? You have a queen to start off with who lives in incredible opulence in Naboo, right? You look at this, you also have an entire ethnic minority who are forced to live in the swamps, in the water, right? So not only is it incredibly opulent, not only does the ruler live in incredible opulence, but there's also an ethnic minority that's basically under an apartheid. And by the way, the ruler's diddling kids. I know we don't talk about this enough, but she's, I know she's 13 at the time, and but he's 6. That's inappropriate. And I mean, he's also 18, 19. I think Anakin is in episode 3, and it's when did this relationship start? But yeah, so one thing that I think is also kind of important, just to kind of skip ahead of my slideshows, is that this in the first few episodes 1 and 2, we're kind of given this idea that the Jedi Council are this all-knowing group of people, and that's why we kind of trust them to run the Republic alongside the Central Empire. But the key thing that's kind of important to remember is that they get the whole idea of balance to the Force wrong, right? So if you remember the prophecy about Anakin is that he's going to bring balance to the Force, right? But then in this scene in Star Wars Episode 3, Obi-Wan Kenobi says something that I think is very telling, right? He says, "You were meant to destroy the Sith, not become one of them," right? And I remember, like, even back then, like, this line kind of stuck out to me because, like, if you think about balance to the force, right? Balance to the force is a situation where the dark side and the light side are balanced with one another, right? If you think about, like, um, I forgot what it's called, like the Zen thing, like, you know, where it's like half light, half dark. Like, it's half light, half dark, right? The imbalance that is existing in the Republic at the time is that it is all the light side of the Force and none of the dark side of the Force, right? So in fact, Anakin, by becoming Darth Vader, you know, is rebalancing it in one way or another, right? But then I think another thing that's kind of telling about this as well is that, like, if you think about the notion of balance, right? So, like, the thing that convinces Anakin to become Darth Vader is the idea that by learning how to become a Sith Lord, he can save Padme's life, right? Like, he can learn, you know, the whole you know, story about, like, have you heard about, you know, this person, I forgot his name, the person, the Wise. It's a story that the Jedi Council don't want to tell you, and it's like, well, you know, the fact that we have technology that could be saving people's lives, but the Jedi Council doesn't want to explore it because presumably it undermines their power, that's kind of like, you know, a bad thing, isn't it? Like, you have all these people dying who you could be saving, but the Jedi Council doesn't want to engage in that dark side of the Force. That's not good. Anyway, one last thing I want to kind of talk about with the Republic is that, like, so the narrative that you're told about Darth Sidious is that he is causing chaos in the Republic so that he can then become the Emperor, right? And he was the person who's behind all this. And again, we're looking at this from the perspective of your friend telling you about a fight that they had with somebody else, and you're only listening to their perspective, right? Let me posit a different way of understanding this, right? So, like, the Jedi Council, really, like, what they are, besides being a religious cult that abducts children, by the way, and, like, forces them into, you know, preparation to be Jedi Masters, like, that whole thing is very barbaric. Like, whenever you saw similar types of practices in history, it's always viewed as, like, a negative thing. Like, for example, like, the Janissaries under the Ottoman Empire were, like, Christian children who were abducted and, like, forced to become soldiers for the Ottoman Empire. Like, nobody looks back on that and says that was a good thing, right? You also had, like, instances of this in ancient China. Again, like, people being abducted as children and forced into military servitude. That's not a good thing, right? But, like, taking it one step further, right? Like, if you look at, like, the Republic and the fact that the Central Republic is so weak, right? Like, who does that actually benefit within the Empire? It actually kind of benefits the Jedi Council, right? Because the Jedi Council, the big value that they bring to the Empire or to the Republic is the fact that, like, we are these force of people with lightsabers who are great at fighting in war, right? And we can lead, you know, your soldiers to, like, you know, defeat these people who are, you know, undermining the Republic. But, like, what if the actual situation that's going on is that the Jedi are the ones putting forward a situation that's naturally destabilizing in order to justify their own existence, right? What if, like, you know, it's actually the Jedi that are doing this thing and blaming it on the Sith, right? Because, like, if you actually, like, look at, like, what happens when the Sith take power, like, the Empire is, like, pretty ordered. Even Tatooine is more ordered in Episode 4 than it is in Episode 1, right? But I wish I was sponsored by Red Bull, but I'm not. In Episode 1, if you remember, like, I think I have a picture of this. Yeah. So, like, in Episode 4, in Episode 1, right, like, Anakin is a slave. By Episode 4, there's no indication that there's any slavery on Tatooine, right? So they got rid of slavery, they got rid of a lot of these barbaric practices, and then on top of that, like, Corselia, which is the planet after the Empire, falls. Right? Again, like this is another situation where you have slavery, you have, you know, really tyrannical local mobs like running things. Under the Empire, it looks like none of that actually occurred. And like obviously, like one of the problems with like the Star Wars universe is that we don't like actually have like any like stories or like, you know, there's no film where it's like a 2 hour discussion of like monetary policy under the two, you know, regimes. So like, you know, we really don't know. But like, you know, also like look at the Emperor, the way that he lives, right? And you look at you contrast that to the way that Amidala lives, right? Like the Emperor isn't diddling kids. Amidala is diddling kids. Amidala is living in this like nice splendor and all that stuff. And I mean, like, yes, the Emperor is living on a Death Star, but like he's living on like a military command ship, and he's like, you know, you look at his place and it's all like bare bones and nothing's happening, right? So just like talk about like some quick things. Like obviously like we have the atrocities of the Empire, we have Anakin killing the younglings, you know, the destruction of the planet. I mean, again, like in this situation, like this is a story written by, you know, people who think Ho Chi Minh is a good person. Probably, you know, if we imagine this as like a thing that actually happened, like probably the facts on this are a little bit different, right? But also like you also have to realize like this is like a story written by the people, and like they're obviously gonna like write terrible things that happen as well, right? But then like again, like you look at like what happened after the Empire, right? So like after the Empire fell, like this resistance movement that apparently had no real plan for like what to do after, you know, the Empire fell. Like you had chaos all over the Empire, and then, you know, Princess Leia became, I don't know, was it Queen Leia, and like, you know, they kind of ruled, but again, like that was destabilizing as well, and immediately a new Sith lords, you know, rose up because, you know, the Force was imbalanced and people didn't like it. So again, like after the Empire fell, you have a bunch of chaos, and places without the Empire, you have a lot of this type of stuff. So, you know, again, like, you know, because this is a story like written by like people who are pro Jedi, obviously like there's, you know, it's going to be a situation where like a lot of the facts show that like the Sith are bad. But I think that like if you actually like take a deep look at like the story and like the way that like these struggles are constructed, like I don't know, like it seems that the Empire was more of a good thing than a bad thing. Again, like if you're a slave on Tatooine, like you kind of like the fact that there was an Empire, right? If you were on Corselia, you know, although the Corselia was actually like during the Empire, but like the important thing about Corselia is that it was a place outside of the purview of the Empire, right? So like if you had a choice of like living within the Empire or without the Empire, you prefer to live within the Empire because there's no like slavery and stuff, right? So yeah, so let me know what you think. You know, I just think that like, you know,